Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. There are new developments today for the city at the beating heart of our country's struggle between democratic norms and autocratic practices, a resistance that ranges from protesters on the streets and observers of federal operations all the way to state and local leaders coming up against a Trump administration employing brutal tactics on the streets of Minneapolis, whose claims rarely match up with the reality. Border Czar Tom Homan today announced a drawdown in the number of federal agents in Minneapolis.
I have announced effective immediately, we will draw down 700 people effective today. 700 law enforcement personnel.
To put that into perspective, there are still going to be 2,000 agents roaming the streets of Minneapolis after the drawdown. Typically, there are about 150 agents working on immigration enforcement activities in that area. That reality is why local leaders are not letting up the pressure. Both Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz say that the drawdown is a step in the right direction, but they reiterated that Operation Metro Surge needs to come to an end, especially as more and more instances of shocking behavior on the part of federal agents comes to light. On Tuesday, ICE agents were seen drawing their guns on observers who have been following them. Watch.
They're pointing handguns at the drivers in the vehicle right now. Get out. Get out.
Hey, get back. You guys need to stay back. You can record, but you gotta be back.
Get out. Hey, open your door.
I need you to back up a little bit more. Hey, get back.
Hey, get the back.
Back.
All right, turn around.
Any idea on you? Have any idea?
Hey, no, don't get on the road. Stay back over here.
In a statement, the Department of Homeland Security claimed that the observers were stalking and obstructing officers who were on a targeted enforcement mission. Adding to the urgency many people on the ground are feeling, a wave of brand new reporting that underscores the lawlessness of the forces in Minneapolis and a Trump administration that appears hell-bent on enabling those practices. First, Wired is reporting that 2 agents involved in the killing of Renee Good and Alex Preddy belong to units that, quote, behave not like local police, but instead like special forces in Iraq, Afghanistan, or other far-flung battlefields. They use explosives to breach the doors of homes. Team members are equipped with full tactical gear, military-style helmets, assault rifles, and heavy-duty crowd control weapons like pepper balls, foam launchers, and flashbang grenades. And like overseas battles or counter-narcotics missions abroad, DHS agents appear to have been told that they no longer need judicial warrants before breaking into private homes or making arrests. That's per an ICE memo released in a whistleblower report and guidance reportedly issued by the Department of Justice. And the Wall Street Journal is reporting that in the immediate aftermath of the killing of Alex Preddy, White House aide Stephen Miller began cooking up a narrative independent of the facts. From that Wall Street Journal report, quote, moments after federal officers fatally shot Alex Preddy, his body still lying face down on an icy Minneapolis street, Customs and Border Protection officials texted Stephen Miller, while White House communication and policy aides tried to sort out what they knew, what they should say, and who was going to brief President Trump. Stephen Miller jumped ahead. 3 hours after the shooting, Miller told the world via X that the slain VA nurse was a, quote, domestic terrorist who had, quote, tried to assassinate federal law enforcement. It's a description that set off one of the Trump administration's biggest political crises of the president's second term. None of the language Miller used have been approved or reviewed, said administration officials familiar with the matter. A potential inflection point in Minneapolis is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Former top DOJ official, legal analyst Andrew Weissman is here. Also joining us, senior national and political reporter Jacob Soboroff. We start on the ground in Minneapolis with our reporter, Nnamdi Igwanwu. Nnamdi, tell us what you're seeing and hearing. And if there's any, can you feel the absence? Can you feel, 2,700 minus 700 when there's still 2,000 agents on the ground?
I think one thing we have felt just being here over the last couple of weeks is we had noted that it felt like we were seeing a bit less of the suburbans driving around. It felt like we were seeing less large clashes between protesters and federal immigration agents, but we were still hearing reports from observers around schools and other places that they still were having sightings. So it seems like things were less overt as they used to be, but make no mistake, ICE agents were still performing and conducting their enforcement operations around the city. Now, in reaction to today's news, we just finished talking to a couple protesters here at the Whipple Federal Building. It's the de facto headquarters for ICE here in Minneapolis, and it has been a site of consistent protests almost every day this year. And the people we spoke to generally are telling us that this doesn't feel like the announcement that Homan maybe think it is. At best, some say it feels like they're being offered a crumb. Others say it doesn't feel like there's news at all, that just like you mentioned, there's still 2,000 immigration agents here, and that is still going to result in widespread fear and distress for many communities throughout this city. I also want to point out that while, yes, a lot of the people we're talking to are left-leaning or more democratic, we also heard from Republicans over the last several days that say, hey, we may be supportive of these immigration enforcement efforts, but we think the conduct of those officers and the way that enforcement takes place does matter. We heard from a Republican state rep yesterday who said, for instance, that he doesn't want anyone in his community to feel that they're going to be profiled based off the color of their skin or to be indiscriminately asked to show their citizenship papers. So that's a belief that is bipartisan. I actually want to play for you a conversation I had with a woman who identifies as a moderate swing Republican, someone who says that she doesn't necessarily love the president, but does feel like she is a Republican. And here's her view of the events that have taken place here and what she wants to see. Take a listen.
I totally agree that we need to get the worst of the worst, the felons, the people who I don't care where they come from, whether they're in Minnesota or they're illegal aliens, as they call them, but they're just going about it the wrong way. People are getting hurt. I used to be more I consider myself more Republican, but I'd vote for a Democrat, whoever, I really felt was I'm very moderate. But they have become so blind to what this Trump, they're all afraid of President Trump. They're frightened of President Trump. You can't tell me that everybody in this audience has no compassion over these people who are being arrested and detained. Now,
So, Nicole, that's what a moderate, someone who identifies as a moderate swing Republican had to say about this. And again, the message we're hearing consistently from some of the groups that have been on the ground, leading mobilization efforts, organizing, is that this just isn't enough. If there are still 2,000 ICE agents here, there's still a problem, with one person telling me earlier that it still feels like a federal invasion is taking place.
Incredible reporting. Jacob, I want to bring you in on this. You see more and more reporting on the trauma for children. 2 people were killed on the streets of Minneapolis trying to protect their neighbors. Schools are not considered on the other side of any of the lines for Donald Trump and ICE. Children are not considered on the other side of the line when it comes to using them as bait to lure out of homes other humans for arrest, even if that human is their pregnant mom. And this community seems to be in a state of real terror and trauma, regardless of the numbers of agents there.
Particularly in the Columbia Heights neighborhood, which is the first place that I showed up when I was there several weeks ago, the day that Liam Ramos was taken, in a story that now everyone knows and understands. And the skepticism of Tom Homan's announcement today that anything, frankly, will change in terms of the posture on the ground, to me, is completely understandable. Not only because Operations Continue, you just showed one of them to all of our viewers, but because of who Tom Homan is and what his track record is. Tom Homan, again, to reiterate, is one of the intellectual founding fathers. Don't take it from me, read Caitlin Dickerson's Pulitzer Prize-winning Atlantic piece about the family separation policy of the first Trump term. And while Greg Bovino and his military outfit is no longer on the streets of Minneapolis, Tom Homan in a suit and tie has been talking about some of these very same policies from the very beginning of these raids, if not before. I mentioned to you that he said to me on the second day of the raid, someone is going to die in these operations. It came up again today as he stood behind that giant DHS seal at that press conference, as if something is going to be different because of the way he looks or the way that he sounds, and that he's not out on the streets throwing tear gas canisters like Greg Bovino is doing. Ultimately, these policies are doing the same thing. They are not targeting the worst of the worst. And while he did use the word targeting today, he didn't rule out what are called collateral arrests. And collateral arrests are another way of saying they're just going to arrest anybody that they find who is undocumented in any way that they possibly can. And even if they're, quote unquote, targeting someone, if there are children in the area, if that child is taken with a parent, nobody has said that they're not going to do the same thing that they did allegedly to Liam Ramos or many of the other children in the stories that we've been hearing coming out of the Dilley Detention Center in Texas, where there's a record number of children in immigration custody right now.
Andrew Weissman, I think that there were certainly some people that voted for Trump who were and maybe remain enthusiastic, right? So let's just stipulate that everyone isn't horrified. I'm horrified, and I think it's interesting that some self-identifying Republicans are horrified by what they see. The worst of the worst, the criminals who carried out the crimes and victimized the people in the videos that Donald Trump played at his rallies before his speeches as a candidate, the vast majority of them, I want to say all of them, but I don't know if there are a couple who aren't, were people who were charged and convicted of crimes and serving time. And those are people that I think 95% of Americans believe should be deported, adjudicated criminals. Why isn't this project focused on people who are beyond dispute, the worst of the worst, adjudicated, convicted criminals in jails?
Well, the reporting is that there actually is that debate going on in the White House with Stephen Miller saying essentially just go after anyone. And the sort of more moderate people in the White House saying we should be going after the people only who have that kind of criminal record and have a final order of deportation. One sign of this is Renee Good, Alex Preddy, no criminal record in either case. They're citizens and they're dead. And to sort of foot stomp on what Jason reported is the policies are the same. You are seeing that they're saying that we can arrest people without in a home, go in without a judicial warrant. That's against the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment. You have no federal investigation at all in connection with the Renee Good shooting. You don't have any access in either the Renee Good shooting or the Alex Preddy shooting to give the state access to the evidence. So what is the message? What is the message when you don't have an independent investigation of shootings to the ICE, the 2,000 ICE agents in Minnesota? What the message is that we will have your back. We will say that whatever happened, you were justified. We will vilify the people who are dead on the ground. Even if it's on videotape and we can see what the truth is, we will say that they were assassins or that they are rogue actors, and we will have your back, and we will not conduct an independent and fair investigation or let the state do that. So if you don't have those kinds of changes, none of the sort of moving the deck chairs around, having a different person there, reducing by 700 but still having 2,000 is going to do anything to prevent or at least thwart the kind of violence that we are seeing against citizens and non-citizens in a way that really violates basic fundamental decency as well as the law.
Yeah, I mean, let me, Jacob, come back to you on this and just ask you if the numbers of troops is even really editorially sound as a data point. It seems that if you had 500 troops acting in an extrajudicial manner, entering homes without permits, pepper spraying protesters, making up lies about people who are protesting, describing them as domestic terrorists, they could still do an enormous amount of harm. Could you just take me through how Chicago gets this show of force off of their streets, and tell me if you have any reporting that suggests Minneapolis is in touch with officials there and hoping for the same outcome?
I think ultimately the answer to why they left L.A., and by the way, I should say, Greg Bovino left L.A., But those troops, those federal agents are still here. I was sat down at lunch yesterday with Memo Torres from LA Taco. These guys count every single day the amount of ICE raids, the people taken off the streets. It's still happening here. It might be quiet for a day or two, but it's still happening. It's still happening in Chicago, but just to a differing degree. What I want to do actually is go back to your other question, Nicole, about why aren't they just targeting the people who are in the prisons who are the worst of the worst? The answer is numbers. Stephen Miller wants to surpass Barack Obama's deporter-in-chief number of being the president who deported more people in the history of our country. But the answer to the question is he didn't do that by just going after the so-called worst of the worst. He had ICE agents inside not just state prisons. Tim Walz said to me, Gavin Newsom said to me, California cooperates and hands over the worst of the worst from the state prison systems to ICE. So does Minneapolis. So does Minnesota, but it's the county jails that don't. The way Barack Obama got those numbers was by sending ICE agents into city and county jails, and in some cases, deporting undocumented immigrants who were inside their pretrial pre-conviction, who may have been in there on misdemeanor marijuana charges or traffic violations that ended up in county jails. And some of them before they even had their day in court before a judge. And that's what this administration wants to do again. And because they can't do that, because they can't go after undocumented immigrants, not even convicted of low-level crimes, but are being held on low-level crimes, they're going after undocumented immigrants who haven't been convicted of anything on the streets of all of these countries, all of these cities and all of these states. That's what they're after. They can't get to the numbers they want by just going after the worst of the worst. And that's what this is all about to Stephen Miller, is having the record of the most deportations ever, of doing what Dwight D. Eisenhower did in 1954, deporting 1 million Mexicans and some Americans. And instead of just deporting, now they're killing immigrants and Americans on the street in pursuit of that same goal.
It's just an extraordinary moment where even by their own telling, they're offering up sort of window dressing. I mean, this is a debate about whether American citizens should be shot and killed for exercising their First Amendment rights to protest. That's what happened in Minneapolis. And Homan goes out and announces a reduction in troops and zero changes to the policies on the street. It feels like much ado about not very much. Nandi, that's a really important piece of sound from a Republican. Thank you for bringing us your reporting and starting us off today. When we come back, we'll talk more about what's being done to protect the most vulnerable victims of the Trump administration's enforcement practices, children. Plus, we'll show you how members of Congress are getting heat for their position on ICE funding as the Trump administration's brand on immigration becomes so toxic. New reporting indicates it's setting off alarms within the GOP. And that comes as Trump himself is showing no signs of a reset, continuing to double and triple down on his call to nationalize elections, which is not constitutional, by the way. We have all those stories and more when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
He's saying that his daughter, has, before everything had happened, she kind of already knew about what was going on, with ICE being in town and stuff like that, and that she would pray that it wouldn't happen to them. And so now that she's inside, detained, she's kind of just, Dad, come get me out. Why can't we just leave? So for him, it's difficult to explain to her, that that's not the process, that there's a process behind it, but he doesn't know how to explain that to her, that they can't leave, and it's been very mentally and physically draining for his daughter. She's losing sleep, and she wants to be home now.
It is every parent's worst nightmare to find out that your children have been taken. For parents in Minneapolis and immigrant families all across our country, that nightmare is becoming part of their day-to-day reality. That was a secretary at the school where 10-year-old Elizabeth Zuna Casaguano is a fourth grader on what she and her father went through after his daughter was taken by ICE. While Elizabeth is now set to be released, she's just one of many, many children, young children, who've been traumatized by Donald Trump's mass deportation policy. The New York Times reports this, quote, "For weeks, the Minneapolis area has been a landscape of intense turmoil as federal immigration agents face off against furious citizens. But there is a quieter upheaval taking place behind closed doors as the city's youngest residents attempt to grasp the altering of their neighborhoods, their schools, their sense of security. Regardless of what they might understand about the politics embedded in their surroundings, some things are clear. The adults in their lives are weary and overwhelmed. Neighbors are scared to leave the house. Bomb threats have been called into schools. Events have been canceled. Friends are missing from classrooms. And parents have been taken. At 9 years old, Gail de Leon carries a copy of his passport in his backpack. Although he was born in the United States, he is of Mexican descent, and his parents fear that he is a target for immigration agents. I had to tell him, if something happens, I know it's going to be scary, but don't worry, because I'm going to come for you and I will find you, his mom, Amanda, said. Gail has grown anxious about the possibility of being taken and does not want to ride the bus or go to school. It does not help that children even younger than him have been whisked away. We're back with Andrew and Jacob. I don't even know what we say about what it is that's being done in our name. All Americans are involved in this, regardless of who you voted for. This is U.S. policy right now. And I wonder, Andrew Weissman, what could possibly help? I mean, would a flood of lawyers from some of the fancy firms that did deals with Donald Trump feel bad about them rushing into places and helping to get these cases in front of judges? Would that help? What is in front of us as an option?
Okay, I'll give you two thoughts. One is the chief judge in Minneapolis issued a decision that got a fair amount of attention, saying that almost 100 documented instances, in his view, exist of this Department of Justice not following immigration orders from the courts. So that means even like you have to release somebody now and it not being done. And one thing that can be done is the judges need to not just call it out. I give them tons and tons of kudos for doing that under incredibly difficult circumstances, being vilified by the administration, death threats to them and their families. But they need to go further. It's not sufficient to just call it out. They can actually hold people in contempt. They can tell lawyers for the administration that they will face disciplinary action. So they really can go further. And the other is that in funding, the people can say in Congress that they will not fund unless, and there's certain basic things. We recently just, in the last segment, talked about the fact that they could insist that we are not going to fund a federal agency that stonewalls a state or local investigation of a shooting. And if you do that, you will not be funded. That's something that you can do. They can insist that you cannot use deadly force in the situations that we've seen before our own eyes, and that there will be real repercussions. They could change the law to be that it's easier to actually sue federal agents when they shoot somebody in those circumstances that we saw with our own eyes with respect to Renee Good and Alex Preddy. So there are real steps that Congress can take, and there are real steps that courts could take. And I think people have to realize this is not normal. We can't close our eyes to what we are seeing on the streets of our country. And we never thought in 1,000 years that we would be here on the 250th anniversary of this nation.
Yeah, it's not normal, and kids don't have time. They don't get a second childhood. Let me show you, Jacob, what the Henneman County Sheriff said is happening right now.
We are traumatizing these kids. We are robbing them of their futures. They should not be having the worries of adults at their young age. It's going to have an everlasting impact on them.
Is the federal government listening? Are they hearing you when you say our children are being robbed of their futures, our communities are living in fear?
If they are, I haven't seen any responses saying anything other than, this is your fault. blue cities, blue states, this is your fault. No, it's everybody's fault. If you are an adult and if you're in the position of power, it's your fault too, because things can be done better. We have to admit that things can be done better. And there are some things that kids should be shielded from. And I would say that this whole mess is one of them.
Donald Trump is underwater on immigration. Once a strong issue for him, it's now, along with the economy, one of his weakest issues. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for one, believes that Donald Trump will be impeached because Republicans will lose in the midterms. There's a state Senate seat in Texas that swung 31 points away from Trump, away from Republicans. Why is the sort of political collapse of support not doing anything to temper or cause a reckoning about the policies that are repelling people, including MAGA voters, Jacob?
Because I think that Stephen Miller is running the show. And there's one thing that Stephen Miller wants, is to pass Barack Obama as the president who deported more people than anyone else. And the only way they feel they can do that is by targeting people who are not the worst of the worst, and that includes children. And I will never forget what Jonathan White, a career social worker, child welfare expert, told me at the height of the family separation policy. Harming children means a century of suffering for those children. And there is a generation beyond the 5,500 separated during the first term. These children that are being targeted in Minneapolis and in St. Paul and elsewhere throughout the country that are going to have a lifetime of trauma as a result of these policies. And that's why the U.S. District Court judge that Andrew was talking about ordered ICE and DHS to explain why they are ignoring court orders to stop moving people out of Minnesota, including children, when they take them. And it's something that I've been focusing on in our own reporting, Nicole. I think we have a piece of video from when I was on with you several weeks ago in Minneapolis, and we rolled up on an ICE operation in an alley here. This is the one in South Minneapolis on January 22nd. It turns out that put into those vehicles down the alley as we stood there was a 2-year-old girl named Chloe and her father named Elvis. And tomorrow on this very broadcast, I'm going to bring everyone a report about what it looks like for a 2-year-old to be put into a van like that by DHS agents, sent out of state to Texas, only to be turned around back to Minnesota because the federal government doesn't have it together. They don't know what they're doing with these children. They're not following judges' orders to protect them. And what ultimately will happen to 2-year-old like Chloe, who you'll meet tomorrow, and her father Elvis, is a century of suffering that someone like that little child will have to endure for the rest of her life.
It's unbelievable. Jacob Soboroff and Andrew Weissman, thank you both so much for sifting through it with me today. After the break, we'll show you how one Republican is responding to what we're talking about, revulsion and anger erupting over these issues from his constituents. We'll talk about that next. So what does it actually look and feel and sound like to be a Republican on the ballot in 2026, facing voters when your voters ask you to defend Trump's immigration policies? This is the town hall featuring Republican Congressman Mike Lawler. Watch.
I have watched your comments on the current administration and your support for ICE and your inability to criticize ICE for murder and for kidnapping children. My question for you, what is your line? What is the line that you won't cross? What can Trump do that you will say that's wrong?
Again, my point with respect to Minneapolis is let the investigations actually take place. You've all clearly prejudged everything. You all know better than the people on the ground.
It actually gets worse from there. He parrots the Trump administration's claim that somehow 5-year-old Liam Ramos was abandoned, a claim strongly denied by his family. This is how Lawler addressed the same crowd whose vote he will be seeking less than 9 months from today.
Hey, bro, you can leave now. Goodbye. Goodbye. We won't proceed until you're gone. Goodbye. You want to act like that? Goodbye. I'm not going until you're leaving. Goodbye.
Security had two members of that audience removed, all because Lawler couldn't answer the question, what was a red line for him when it comes to Donald Trump. I want to bring in political analyst, former Senator Claire McCaskill, also joining us, managing editor of The Bulwark, contributor Sam Stein. Sam, hey bro is so 2024, right? When the Manosphere marched in lockstep. Let me show you how Andrew Schultz of Manosphere fame, host of Flagrant and Brilliant Idiots podcast, is feeling about Trump and the Republicans.
But I will say that this was a breaking point for me in the way that the administration responded to it. Like, I didn't think what's happening right now with ICE could happen in America. I genuinely did not think that was possible. I thought our institution, I thought the Constitution would hold up. When I see it and then immediately defend it, I start to go, we gotta be very loud about this. Like, it all of a sudden becomes not like liberal catastrophic thinking. It starts to become very reasonable, nuanced criticism of the administration. They have just made the most far left critiques of the Trump administration. Their reaction to this has just justified all of them. In one moment, all of their responses from Trump to Kash Patel, they have justified every single and I know people will probably look at this and be like, they've done a million other things to justify them. Sure, and that's fair. But this specific situation, I think, is a breaking point, and it has justified all those criticisms. I think people's antennas are way up, and people's antennas that were not up initially.
This is like seeing the Epstein files.
This is a really good description of what's happening in the country, right? It's not that Trump wasn't appalling in every way in the first term. It's that, and I want to quote him accurately, as Andrew Schultz said, we have to be loud about this. If it all of a sudden becomes not a liberal catastrophic thinking, it starts to be a very reasonable, nuanced criticism of the administration. They have just made the most far-left critiques of the Trump administration. The reaction to this has justified all of them. That seems to be the political problem, that every lie Trump has told about the economy, every lie Trump has told, I remember the Washington Post used to count them, which seems so quaint, both for lying and for the Washington Post. All of that was true, and then some, Sam.
Yeah, and I've kind of tried to figure out why the ICE issue has resonated the way it does. And I think the simplest way to think about it is that those other issues that they're talking about, they were obviously important and significant, but they weren't visceral. They weren't specifically caught on tape. And that video wasn't disseminated across our social media feeds. So the Doge cuts, the tariffs, even the threats on Greenland, the healthcare subsidies, that was more theoretical. It was stuff you read about. Here you have on tape 2 people being killed by agents of the state. Now, you might have different interpretations of what you saw, but you saw it.